The war between Israel and Hamas escalates, and the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says that the death toll has now surpassed the 10,000 mark. Meanwhile, top American diplomat Antony Blinken concludes his visit to Turkey. He stressed again that a humanitarian pause would work positively towards safe release of hostages. While in Turkey, Blinken met several Turkish officials. He was welcomed by his Turkish counterpart, Hakan Fidan. It was Blinken's first visit to Turkey after Hamas's attack on October 7th against Israel. He said U.S. is working very aggressively to dramatically expand the amount of aid reaching the civilians in the Gaza Strip.
We're also very focused not only on Gaza, but what's happening in the West Bank. We've made very clear our concerns about extremist violence in the West Bank. We've heard the Israeli government make commitments on dealing more effectively with that, and we're watching very closely to make sure that that happens.
Earlier, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has criticized Israel's offensive in Gaza. He described the Israeli airstrikes as crimes against humanity. He also suspended communication with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Erdogan unleashed a scathing attack at Israel and its Western supporters. He accused Western powers of shedding tears over the death of civilians in Ukraine and turning a blind eye on the death of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Hours before Blinken's arrival, hundreds of protesters marched to an air base that houses U.S. forces in Turkey. Apart from the war between Israel and Gaza, Ankara is upset that U.S. Congress is holding up the approval of a deal of F-16 jets to modernize Turkey's air force. Before arriving in Turkey, Blinken had visited Jordan, where he held talks with Egyptian, Jordanian, Saudi, Qatari, and Emirati diplomats as a senior Palestinian official. After the talks, Blinken stood side by side at a line of podiums with his counterparts from Jordan and Egypt. They discussed what he said was their shared desire to protect civilians in Gaza and improve aid flow to the besieged territory. But clear point of divisions emerged on the question of a possible ceasefire. The Jordanian and Egyptian foreign ministers urged an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Edward P. Joseph, Senior Fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and a Foreign Policy Analyst. Edward is joining us from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to WION, and good to see you on this Monday morning, Edward. So there's this talk about President Biden being pressured into a ceasefire, the Biden administration in general, not only by international allies and the Arab world, but also, someone like Rashida Tlaib, who, is from Michigan. She's the first Palestinian American to serve on Capitol Hill. And the question is that possible for the Biden administration to do?
I think what we see in the Middle East with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's efforts is the true reality on the ground, because it's remarkable. We see Secretary of State Blinken, despite, or rather maybe because of, the principled and strong position of the United States, which is both to support Israel's right to defend self-defense and to insist and pressure Israel on ways of improving the safety and providing humanitarian aid for suffering Palestinian civilians. We see that, and we see that Secretary Blinken is not isolated. He, as your report mentioned, there he was in Amman on the podium, not just in a private meeting, but publicly, standing next to the foreign ministers of Egypt and Jordan, each of them there showing that their willingness. He met with Palestinian Authority President Abbas, who received him in Ramallah. And here he's received even by in Turkey by President Erdogan. So this is really striking in the context of pressure for a ceasefire, because Blinken has been absolutely firm and clear in his opposition to that. And so when he goes on these visits, he is received, even though his hosts, including President Erdogan, know ahead of time that the U.S. is absolutely determined to to not allow Hamas to continue to expose Palestinian civilians to risk, and is determined to allow Israel to defend itself within the confines of international law, and taking steps, insisting on steps to control violence in the West Bank, as your report indicated, and to get desperately needed aid to Palestinians in Gaza. Please.
Edward, so if we're talking about some kind of breakthrough that Antony Blinken really had achieved in the Middle East, can you briefly talk about those breakthroughs? And there's a lot of talk about, possible peace, whether a ceasefire or a humanitarian pause, and the release of hostages. But where do we stand now, and what's next? Sorry, it's a big question. Well, I know.
Of course, and it's a very important question, Susan, that you ask. Of course, there is no breakthrough because of developments on the ground, and there's no breakthrough here because, of course, Israel is not the only actor in the conflict, and Israel is not the only actor that can provide desperately needed assistance and support for Palestinian civilians. The primary actor, ironically, the primary actor who can support and provide immediate relief for Palestinian civilians is Hamas, of course, because if Hamas would release those hostages, this certainly the suffering would be over, and maybe even the war could be brought to a rapid termination. But Hamas refuses to do that. Hamas is the one that launched this war on October 7th, which the United States recognizes. And also, it's pretty clear in private conversations that Secretary Blinken is having with his Jordanian and Egyptian counterparts and others, that I'm sure behind closed doors, these leaders are expressing their agreement with the United States, as Dennis Ross, the former high-level U.S. negotiator, reported publicly, that they desperately want Israel to, quote, destroy Hamas. So in other words, despite their outrage, professed outrage about Israeli attacks behind closed doors, these Arab neighbors of Israel desperately want to see Hamas destroyed and fear what could be the result if Hamas is left in place. Please.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Egypt, for one, is so concerned about Hamas that it has reservations about opening its border. We know Hamas was born from the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So when you look at the history, it almost seems like Israel is, just saying, let us do what we need to do. We don't need your help. We just need your support, and we'll take care of it. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Edward, always great talking to you. Thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Likewise. Thank you very much.